kind of two questions Sunday. One of them I just hadn't spent any time on, just frankly. So that's what I said. When I was asked the question, I said, I didn't study that, and I'm not going to field an answer without taking a look at it. I was asked about the giants, right? And you see that in the beginning of chapter 6 about who are these giants, right, that are described there at the beginning. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what I believe I know about it, and then I'll tell you what a lot of people speculate, but it wouldn't. Your speculation and my speculation would be worth the same, right? Nothing. But it is interesting, and here's something you may or may not know. There's more than one word that is rendered giant in the Old Testament in particular. There are what then often become known as Nephilim, right? Nephil, from that word, and the Raphalim, which comes from Rapha, which is a different word, both rendered in English giant. One meaning giant in stature, the other meaning tyrant, bully, violent. That's Genesis 6. The word that is used as giant here in Genesis 6 is the one that's defined as tyrant and bully and violent. Now, by the way, does that fit? Yes. Yeah, it's exactly the description of what's happening among the people of that day. Fast forward in the days of who's the most famous, and don't say Andre. Goliath, right? Goliath. I'm sorry, never mind. Half the people are looking at me like I have no idea, and some of you thought that was funny. But anyway, Goliath, right? And he is descendant. In fact, we sometimes forget, was Goliath the only giant of his day? No, if you go look at 1 Chronicles chapter 20, David and his men were still dealing with giants beyond Goliath. They were related. He's got a brother that's referenced there. He has sons that are referenced there that were large men. One had a spear that was the size of a what? Anybody remember? A weaver's staff or whatever you want to call that, right? Those sizable individuals were around for a long period of time. You see references to giants. When else? We didn't study this all that long ago. In the book of Numbers. When they went to what? When they went to spy out the land, they said, oh man, the giants, the sons of Anak live there. And you see these various uses of the word giant. So, my point simply as it relates to the word itself, I don't know whether when he says giants here in Genesis chapter 6, my feeling contextually is, and by the word that is used there, that you're not necessarily dealing with the 9'6" type. You're dealing with the tyrant, bully, violent type who had power and strength and abilities. Might be a greater connectivity there.
I just need you to repeat that second word again. What you're talking about now, the tyrant, bully type. What was the name? That wasn't Nephilim, it was the other one.
The Raphalim. Or is the second, Rapha. Those are the giants, though. Those are the tall ones, I believe. If I've got let me look at my notes to make sure. Yes. So Raphalim, think of that line of Goliath. Okay. Nephilim or Nephil, think of tyrant, bully. By the way, and that is the word. Just so you know, and since I brought it up, that's also the words used in Numbers, as it relates to those sons of Anak that are noted there. That's the word, the Hebrew word that's used for giant there. And all I'm trying to illustrate to you is sometimes with translated words, you've got to be careful that you just don't assume a distinctive, immediate conclusion, because the word may not actually lend us. And by the way, we don't use the word giant in the sense of tyrant or bully or violent or of that. But we do use the word more than in one sense, right? Sometimes we talk about somebody who's tall of stature. Maybe we use it symbolically to represent somebody tall in position, right? They are a giant among a category, right? And we might use words accommodatively like that as well. There was a second question I was asking in reference to that. I think it was about Seth. Was it not? Did I hear it wrong? And the lineage of Seth, which was whom, by the way? Whose child was Adam, right? Okay, so he's the third, right? Cain, Abel, Seth. And it is generally thought of that some of these giants may have come from him. The reason for that is that some argue that when this Genesis 6 account talks about the sons of God, that they are of the righteous line of Adam, which would be not Cain, but Seth, right? And, by the way, Seth is in the lineage of whom? Jesus. And who are we talking about here? It's in the lineage of Noah, too. It's in the lineage of Noah, too. So is it possible that whatever was passed down from Seth is still part of Noah and whom else then? His sons. And I suppose that's genetically possible, that whatever Seth had. But again, here's where I want to step back from those things. I'm just kind of sharing with you what you could read and find and look at. There's not a single shred of positive evidence of that. There's nothing I can't point to you a single biblical narrative that would give me absolute concrete understanding that these, to me anyway, maybe you've got it and I don't, but that these sons of God in Genesis 6 are 100% the lineage of Seth. I don't know what I would turn to other than scholarly works, maybe, to draw an absolute conclusion.
Do some of that, and David, Albert Barnes, the commentator, said that the descendants of Cain was the willful, unruly, and against the patriarchal rule. So that goes along with what you're saying about the giants.
Yeah, as Canaanites, as part of that conversation, you eventually get into in the book of Numbers as well. And I think you see some of that. The only other explanation, by the way, that some people have of these sons of God is they were whom? Anybody ever heard anything other than Seth? Some say angels. Some say these were angelic sons of God. They were angelic beings. I'll give you one thought that I think kind of maybe dispels that. When Jesus, and maybe you don't think this does, but I'll give it to you for food for thought. When Jesus was dealing with some Pharisees who were trying to trap him, in Matthew 22, he said, the angels are neither what? They neither marry nor given him. In the resurrection, you will be like the angels. They neither marry nor are given in marriage. They don't take on those earthly relationships. And that's how we will be, he said, in the resurrection in Jesus' teaching. To me, that's enough to at least place a lot of doubt in my mind that Genesis 6, these sons of God, are any reference whatsoever to an angelic being, which might then lend me back to somebody like Seth, and I can understand how that would fit. But at the end of that 15-minute discussion, my answer is still the same. I still don't know. I know a lot more than I did before I was asked the question, because I spent some time this week doing some research on it. But at the end of all that, I've got a lot of thoughts of men and some pointing to some certain texts that help us maybe dispel some things. But Texas simply doesn't offer it. And so, lest you think I'll never segue this back to the actual discussion of our lesson, here's the segue. What really we need to appreciate is Noah's got to build an ark, and he's got to do that in the midst of a world that's what? That wicked, tyrant, evil, bullies. Sometimes you and I got to gather our wood in the midst of whom?
Evil, the wicked, the
Bullies, the tyrants, the people that have no interest whatsoever in honoring what is righteous and good, like the sons of God. Now, there's one more interesting verse I didn't quite get to. I was asked kind of in the midst of our study Sunday, which if you recall, if you were here or watched it, it bumped me to question 8 ahead of time. But we talked a little bit about the age of Noah, right? Real quick, into chapter 5, he's introduced as being 500, right? 500 at the end of chapter 5. And there seems to be no real breath between chapter 5 and 6, right? Noah was 500 years. He had these children. And, verse 1 of chapter 6, these events begin to occur. We know when you fast forward into future chapters, chapter 7 in particular, we find out that the flood came when Noah was roughly what? 600. Let me add one more verse that we didn't get to, and it's actually back in chapter 6. Chapter 6, and I want you to look with me because I did not pause here as we could have Sunday. So, sorry, I can get rid of that for you so you don't have to look through a prompt. Maybe I will. There's an interesting statement made here. Verse 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120. Now, I guess we've got maybe two concepts, two ideas we could explore for half a second here. Eventually, Noah's going to be, we're told, again, moving forward in some of these chapters, he's going to end up being how old? 950. So, some might say, well, this 120 is a reference to the new kind of age span of people after all these events are going to occur. God will no longer strive with man, flood will come, world will change, 120. I don't think that's what he's saying here, by the way. What I think he's saying is simply this. God is going to give them a space of 120 years to fix this before this flood comes. He will not always strive, right? What's he doing right now? He's in conflict with these violent, tyrant, evil, wicked, imagination, sinful, every moment of every day people. He's like, in striving and conflict, he said, but I'm not always going to just stay in strife and conflict with them. I'm giving them a space of 120 years, which roughly fits, right? The time period in which, and because I don't subscribe to the idea, by the way, that when that verse 32 of chapter 5, the end of chapter 5, that they're pinpointing the exact year of Noah's life. We're getting, I believe, generalities, right? You can argue, and I'm just giving you my thought. You're getting generalities. You're not necessarily, right? Because you got 500, then you got 600, then you got 950. Those seem awfully round to me, do they not? Right? With men like Methuselah, we get a what? Yeah, we get a very precise description. It feels to me like with Noah, we're getting more general thought processes as it relates to the age. So, and you've got this time period in which the flood ultimately comes. If 500 is when you first see this comment made about him, roughly at the end of chapter 5. Then you roughly 600 when the flood comes. God says, I'm going to give him about 120 years. That fits the time period, right? It fits the span of time that Noah was constructing an ark, continuing to speak truth to the people at the same time, I believe God, in the justice and fairness of who He is, would have allowed any of these others to repent and climb on board with Noah. Even if He couldn't find a big enough remnant to repent from the flood itself. I will not always strive with man, but I'm going to give about a span of 120 years, God says, and then this flood's coming. He seems committed to that. Obviously, God can do that because He can already see what's going to happen over that 120-year span. But I just want you to get this imagery. Noah's building this ark. He and his sons, right? They're going to gather in the sealant, the pitch that they need to seal this thing from within, without. And again, you're talking about a long span of time. A long span of time. I think there was a secondary question to this that I wanted to make sure we came to. And it's about that comparison that Peter makes in 1 Peter chapter 3. And I apologize, I am bouncing these questions all over. I let a class question lead me to that last week, but now I'm just all over the map. So this is technically question 7 if you're looking at them. But we need to spend a moment here in 1 Peter chapter 3. Now, I'll come back to that Hebrews text here in just a minute. 1 Peter chapter 3. I thought I had it set, but let me just go to it. And I want you to look down at about verse 20. And no, I didn't spend any time on verse 19, so don't ask me that tonight. But if you read verse 19, you understand that why I said that. But verse 20, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. What I want us to simply note is that in the time of the disobedience in the days of Noah, what was God being? Long-suffering. That's interesting, isn't it? Because our lesson kind of pulls us in 2 different directions sometimes. The point of our series is Noah had to step up and build the ark. The salvation of you and your family depends on it. That's the point of these lessons that I'm sharing with you. But the reality is, God could have said, hey, Noah, look at that ark I just set down beside you. Go get in it. Right? God had the power to just place an ark there. Why didn't He? I'm not trying to trick you. I'm trying to get you to think about it. Yeah. Because God is long-suffering. What's 1 Peter 3 verse 9 say? Go back and look. Go back. Oh, I'm in the wrong. I tricked myself. 2 Peter 3 verse 9. That's where I want to be. As soon as I said it, I knew I wasn't right. But look at verse 9 of chapter 3 of 2 Peter. The Lord is not slack concerning His promises, as some men count slackness, but is what? Long-suffering to usward, just like He was in the days of Noah. Why are we waiting 120 years, Lord? If these men are evil, and so filled with evil that even their imaginations, their hearts are filled with sin and unrighteousness on a regular basis, why are you just not bringing the condemnation now? And here's the reason. It's the same reason He's not bringing condemnation and Jesus hasn't returned yet today. It is the fact that God is long-suffering. In the days of Noah, 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 20 and 21, what's He doing? He's being patient. He's waiting. Will any of these souls realize that the one righteous man in the neighborhood is building an awfully large vessel? And that man, whom we've probably known as being a what? A righteous man. If there was ever a guy that stuck out, one righteous man in the midst of that world that he describes in Genesis chapter 6, he's going to stick out, right? He is going to be noticed as being highly different than the rest of the world he's living in. Will there be anybody see something, hear something, pay attention to any of the things that Noah's doing? And even though God may have known the answer to that question before anyone could ever ask it, He still allowed for that time span to go. Even though before year 1 of the build the ark process, God would have already understood the answer as to whether His long-suffering would have been honored by anybody. And yet He still waited that time span and let Noah build that ark despite that fact. What's your point, Brian? Here's my point. When you're gathering your own wood and you're building your own ark, when you're building your own conviction of salvation and promise in God's testimony, and you may feel like nobody cares, nobody's listening, nobody's concerned about their soul, nobody's interested in hearing anything about God's Word, God is still being long-suffering in hopes that somebody will. And I'm hopeful that even when I see a world turned upside down, and even though I'm accepting personal accountability to my own salvation, New Testament says, work out your own salvation with fear. While I'm building my ark, right? In the parallel we're trying to talk about here. And I'm trying to secure my own personal salvation, which at the end of the day is what Noah was trying to do. Hopeful that family would come on board, got that far at least. But in the meantime, he's hoping maybe somebody else will see the importance of that, repent, and get on the ark with him. And whether that will happen in our lives or not, I cannot tell. I don't know. I don't know whether those people you or I are trying to convince to get on the ark will get on with us or not. I don't know. Noah went 100 and some odd years hoping somebody would listen, hear, pay attention, and get on the ark. Accept the long-suffering of God and get on the ark. My role, Noah's role, wasn't to look to God and say, Lord, you know these people. There's not a single one of them going to get on this ark. No, his role was to build the ark, prepare, teach the truth, use the long-suffering, be that preacher of righteousness, and then let people make their decisions. God's being long-suffering while we build our ark and gather our wood. And that's at the heart, I think, of this message that we're trying to appreciate in this series. That's 1,000 things we could talk about as it relates to the account of Noah. But I'm just trying to get us to appreciate what are we doing as we build our ark, as we work out our own salvation. And that's not selfish, by the way. I say that in the sense that I can't help anybody if I'm not engaged personally first, right? I'm of no value to anybody else if I'm not first personally accountable. But it's a long-suffering process that even Noah had decades and decades of.
You're right, what you're saying, because before Noah was given the dimensions of the ark, he tried to get God to repent of his decision to destroy their man.
You could see, you could see the patience of Noah throughout this process of hopeful and trying. To accomplish that. And we do have a salvation that he says is compared to that. Verse 21 of 1 Peter chapter 3 tells us that the like figure of this imagery that you see in the days of Noah, whereunto even baptism doth also now save us. His salvation came by water because God had him build an ark. Our salvation comes by water through baptism because it's the instructions and purposes and the authority of God that leads us there. Noah becomes the example of that. And I just wanted to make sure we noted that. Go ahead, Randy.
A little tidbit on that. Years, Methuselah was 969.
Right.
If you do that, work it out, he had to die the year of the flood in that first month or so. So he had to, if it went before that, he would never been 969 years old.
It is interesting. When you start looking at all that, and your head will spin a little bit when you're trying to do. Yeah, you can see it come out. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to think about. I'll have to go back and look at some of that. You got my interest peaked now again. So why did he build it? What's the motivation? That's back up to question 4, by the way. Okay, reverence and fear that he has, and what's within, okay, faith, right? Hebrews chapter 11, right? Unless you thought we'd never get there. Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 7. He doesn't cut down one tree. He doesn't cut one board. He doesn't gather 1 ounce of pitch to seal that ark with. If he doesn't what? Yeah, and if he doesn't have faith, which what we also would contribute to the idea of, if he didn't believe it. If he didn't believe it, right? And by the way, did he have any empirical, that's too big a word for even for me, did he have any hard proven evidence of any need for such a vessel? No, there never anything had ever happened, right? He would have, in human senses, every reason, right? He'd have every reason to not believe this. He'd never seen anything like this before. He'd never seen God's judgment in this fashion before. None of the things he's been asked to do or believe is something that he could go back to and say, I've witnessed that before, or I've seen something similar to that, and so I'll follow, right? Because I've had that. He doesn't, in some senses, have the same luxury that we do. We have the great privilege. We got a whole book, right? We've got the whole Bible. We've got every ounce of the history that God has revealed to us of man, and we can witness and watch the various events that God fulfills, and our faith is built upon a whole lot more testimony of what God has done, said, availed, accomplished than Noah ever had. By faith, right? Verse 7, by faith, being warned of God, if he don't believe it, he doesn't adhere to it. Being warned of God, of things not seen as yet, moved with, and there's that word we heard a moment ago, moved with fear. It's not a word people like when it comes to our relationship with God. I'll push the pause button for a second. It's not the only motivation, by the way. People can be guilty of acting like it's the only motivation to serve God is to be afraid of Him. No, loving Him is a pretty good motivator too. Desiring to honor Him is a pretty good motivator. But this is simply a reference to Noah in that moment in time when God calls upon him and says, listen, this world is wicked. I'm done with it. I'm going to destroy all flesh. You need to build an ark to the saving of your soul. Moved with fear when he hears that. Why? Because he was a man of faith before God said it. That's Job, by the way. I don't want to get ahead of myself. That's Job. Right? It isn't just about what Noah and Job became after the challenges. The stories really are just as much about what kind of men they were before. If Noah wasn't a man of faith before, he would have just been what? He'd been destroyed with the rest of them. That was God's point, right? I will destroy all flesh from among the earth. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord because he was a man of faith. Noah doesn't take one step towards building an ark if he didn't have faith, belief, and confidence in the Creator, and if he didn't have enough respect and fear of that God who said, I'm bringing a flood. And it doesn't matter whether you've ever seen a flood or not, Noah. And it doesn't matter whether you've ever seen any kind of conflict or challenge like you're going to witness. He believes it, and he moves with fear. He builds the ark, and it saves him and his household. And there's an added thought there, by the way. By the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Here's the thought I want us to appreciate. When you're gathering your wood and you're living your life of faith, and you're building your ark, right? Your personal salvation and commitment to God, your convictions that lead you. There are going to be those that challenge us. There are going to be those who scoff. And we also have to accept the fact that righteousness will always condemn evil. You can't get around it. And sometimes it's a criticism, right? And it's hard to hear. It's hard to hear friends and neighbor and family members and others say, well, you think, right? You think I'm condemned. You think I'm lost. You think I'm a sinner. You think, no. It's hard to hear that. But what I appreciate about Noah here, and one of the lessons that we learn from him, is when you gather your own wood, when you gather your own faith, when you work on the ark of salvation that God has set before us, you are going to condemn the world. You can't help but do it. Remember what we said earlier about the fact that Noah stuck out? He stuck out in this crowd. He looked a lot different, behaved a lot different, sounded a lot different than that world he was in. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's part of the consequential reality of living a life of faith. Is righteousness has always condemned unrighteousness. And you don't even have to verbalize it. I don't think he's saying that Noah went around verbalizing, you're condemned, you're condemned, you're condemned, you're condemned. It's not, no, just the very fact that he lived a life of faith, a life of righteousness, a life that walked with God. That in and of itself, that example, that life choice led him to condemn the sinful world that he was in. And we're going to have to be ready for that. We're going to have to be ready for a reality that says, when I walk by faith, when I live my faith, it will of necessity condemn all things contrary to righteousness when we're gathering our own wood. It's important, I think, a principle for us to have to respect and know its reality. And Noah became the example of. I'll pause. Your thoughts, questions you might have. Yep. Let the work follow the faith that he had. Absolutely. So let me run back. I bounced all over the map with you on these lesson sheets. We didn't talk a lot, but there were other questions. 6 asked, what additional work did he have to do? All right, so he's going to have to make sure these animals survive all this, right? And he's going to have basically, kind of summary form, but there's going to be animals that will populate the earth when the ark lands. There'll be animals for sacrifice, and there'll be animals, I believe there'll be animals, everything needed to eat, he said, gather that as well. And so you might see various forms of the gathering. I've always found it interesting, because generally if I showed you a picture, I imagine if you Googled it, don't waste your time right now, but if you Googled it and said, show me a picture of Noah loading the ark, what would you see? 2 by 2, 2 by 2. You wouldn't see all the others, that's hard enough, by the way, right? I remember, I think it was Vernon Teagarden said one time, he said he would have had a hard time being Noah. He said he would have had to ask the Lord if he could build 2 arks. The second one was for all the snakes. But I'm just trying, all of it. While he's building this vessel, then he's also going to have to start slowly corralling these various species in order to be able to continue the earth as God would have it. Noah's got a lot in front of him. I said gather his own wood, but he's doing a lot more than that, isn't he? He's doing a lot more than just gathering gopher wood. He's building this ark. He's prepping it. He's preaching in the meantime. He's declaring the message of God to others in the meantime. He's gathering these animals that are going to be necessary for all the various facets that he's going to have to fulfill. He is a highly busy man. And the final question I wanted to leave with you was question 9. And that was simply this. Do we know at what point in life we may be called upon to gather our wood? What I mean by that is we don't always know. Noah's in the latter half. I mean, nobody's living to 950 now. But we can look at it that way. He's in the latter half of his lifespan when he's called upon to do this. And we don't always know. And here's the only thing I wanted us to think about. It may not be the most convenient time of your life that the greatest challenges of faith come. In fact, I would argue that Satan waits for the least convenient time to you to bring your challenge to faith. Because he doesn't play fair, and he doesn't like you. He doesn't want you saved. He doesn't want your soul saved. And so he does whatever he can. So we've got to be ready. That's the segue into Job's Sunday study. We got to be ready all the time to gather wood and build an ark and act on faith. Because we don't know when we might be called to do that. We'll segue back into Job, lesson 3, on Sunday morning.